See, he was obedient on the outside, but he was judgmental on the inside. So here's the thing. You can be in church, you can be on the mission field, you can be doing right, but you can be lost in self-righteousness. And pride blinds you of your own need for the same mercy you deny others.
Welcome to another episode of Kingdom First Podcast, God's Blueprint for Your Best Life. It's your host, Jonathan Loudermilk, and we have our number 3 guest in my guest spotlight series, where we're going to be diving into, really the journey of really what it's like to be a Christian. We're going to be diving into some scripture. We're going to be diving into some biblical principles. But, the guest that I have on today, which is out of the original 8 that we're going to be doing for this, was one of the top people that popped into mind with me. I've had the pleasure of getting to know this man over the past, 6 to 9 months. He's one of our authors that's worked with us. He's a best-selling author, which we'll be talking about his book today, Healing in the Wild. But most importantly, this man's become really family of choice at the end of the day to me and my wife, Renee. And, I just know the journey he's been on. I know the sacrifice he's made. I know the tough conversations he's had, not only with others, but with himself and God behind closed doors. And I just couldn't think of a better example of someone to bring on that we could really start getting into the trenches of like what this really looks like, and really pulling out some blueprints and gold nuggets of what does it look like to really live your best life through God's plan that he has for your life. So I want to welcome my friend and best-selling author, Healing in the Wild, Dr. Carter Check. Man, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on and spend some time jamming out with me about this, dude. It's an honor to have you on.
Hey, it's an honor to be here. Um, we've had a pretty special journey it's not ending, it's just beginning. So,
Yeah.
great to be here and look forward to wherever this takes us.
Yeah, man. So like, dude, like there's so much we could unpack with like just what you've gone through in life and all the things you're doing now with your nonprofit. But like where I like to start with everyone is not really like in the end zone where all the highlights, like we'll get to that point. I want to start at the beginning for you. So like if you want to just share
Yeah.
like where's your background? How'd you grow up? Now, what did that journey look like till eventually you kind of got led to Christ, and we'll just kind of jam out and go from there.
Yeah. Um, so, I was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Go Packers. Sorry for you Bear fans out there, but you know how it is. Um, and then shortly after, I guess right about the time I started kindergarten, my family moved to a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. And so I grew up in Georgia, um, kindergarten through high school. Um, I, I, I didn't grow up in church. As a matter of fact, my involvement around the Bible was really my mom was a believer. And I can remember my mom reading her Bible in the morning and praying. But, I had an older brother and my dad. And really, from the get-go, outside and outdoors was always our thing, whether it was hunting, fishing, riding four-wheelers, traveling around, going just that was really my concept of church, Jonathan, in a traditional sense was Christmas Eve and Easter. We would go because mom wanted to go. But outside of
Right.
that, um, I guess the really cool thing about my mom was there was never pressure around the Lord. It was always there. I could see her read her Bible, but it was never like, if you don't follow God, you're going to end up in hell and things like
Right.
that.
Right.
Um, and so, I would say that I grew up in like a traditional Southern home. Um, I think I was a good family. My parents are still married today, coming up on 50 years of marriage, type
That's awesome.
relationship. So, and not that they didn't have their difficulties, but I had that
For
modeled
sure.
in front of me. I grew up in a home where the loudest person usually got the most attention. So, we're some yellers around my house. But it wasn't until the funny thing is, most people go into the military and they lose God. I went into the
Hmm.
military and found God, or probably better to say, God found me. And, without getting really deep into the story, because then we'll just camp there the whole time. I went through a situation when I was in the military where I was wrongfully accused of a crime. Um, it was of political nature. I was defending myself off post. And it just happened to be that one of the people who was injured in the incident was the son of a dignitary from South Korea. And the army offered me and my battle buddy up to be prosecuted for a life sentence in prison, which is what assault and battery carries in South Korea. That weekend um, was really wild because Friday night I'm in the altercation. Saturday morning I'm at the hospital getting casted because I broke my wrist in the altercation. Saturday afternoon we're hearing from leadership that, hey, you guys are going to be going to court and there's a JAG order that's now restricted you from leaving the country until this is all resolved. We find out that the sentence is possibly life in prison. Um, and then fast forward, 9 months is a different story. But that Saturday night is a pivotal moment that I kind of want to think about for a second. It's the only time in my life, Jonathan, that I thought maybe ending my life would be a smart decision. Because what are they going to do to an American soldier in a Korean prison the rest of my life? Right. And I threw the first punch. Yes, it was in defense, it was a weapon and all of that. But, in situations like that, when you're 18, you're on the other side of the world, I really felt like, everything was against me. And I remember having that thought. I walked down the hallway and, then you know, in that time of my life, cell phones maybe were around, little flip phone type thing. This was 1995, but having a cell phone or an iPhone or something like that was non-existent. So when you walk down the hallway, there was one rotary phone, that if anybody remembers what those things are, that we
Oh
would
yeah.
use. And that's the phone that everybody would use to call family. And you'd usually have to have some special type of long distance card that you would buy in the PX, and you'd have to put that code in to be able to call internationally. And I remember calling and having a conversation with my mom. And that conversation was, I really felt like, and this might be the last time I ever get to spend time with my mom. I might never get to eat my mom's eggs and toast again. I mean, I'm 18. That's kind of the things you think about. But for me, I don't know. If you said, hey, Carter, what's the one thing you want to eat the rest of your life and never get it taken away from you? It's steak and eggs, man. I mean, it's steak and eggs. Okay. You can eat it for dinner. You can eat it for breakfast. You
Right.
can eat it any time, in my opinion.
That's a Southern
Um,
House staple right there.
yeah, come on. And I hung up the phone and I thought to myself, man, maybe you should just go walk off the top of this building. Just end it now and not go through all this stuff, right? And I looked, and right where the phone is where they would, it was like one of those cork boards where there's advertisements or stuff from the battalion, like important information. And there was a list of chapel services. And I remember looking at that list, and I'm not going to say anything about specific denominations or anything, but I looked at some of them and I thought, nah, I'm not going to that, because all my, buddies from that I knew went to those types of churches. They were out drinking and getting high with me on, Saturday night back in the day. And then, talking about, hey, I got to go home. I got to get to Bible study in the morning. I'm thinking to myself, what? You know what I mean? Are you
Right.
going to be sober by then type deal? Because my understanding of I think theistic faith and organized religion at that point, I think is typical for most people, that the devil uses things like um, hypocrites and all of that to keep you from.
Mm-hmm.
what would be good for you, and listen, let's be honest about something. All we need is usually one reason to not do something that we know is good for us. So, I had
Right.
all those boxes checked. So I'm like, no, not doing that, not doing that. And there was one that said Kojic, Cogic. And I'm like, well, I don't know what that is, so I'm going to go to that one. And what's wild is that Sunday morning I went to a Kojic service on this side of the base. And my buddy Olin, that I went through the situation with, who actually was a believer, grew up in church, he went to a Kojic service on the other side of post. And in his service, he rededicated his life to Christ. In my service, I went and got born again in the traditional
Mm.
sense. And what I didn't realize was Kojic is Church of God in Christ, and it's the Church of God slant that is all black. So here I am, white boy, walking into an all black service, and I had one thing on my mind. I'm here to meet the Jesus that I watched my mom have a relationship with my entire life. And
Yeah.
and that was it. So I listened to like 8 or 9 praise reports, and I mean, and it was,
Tons of
and listen,
singing. Was there tons of singing?
tons of singing.
Yeah,
Yes,
man.
tons of singing, and listen, that congregation loved me, like they loved on me, like, you know what I mean. And look, I grew up in Atlanta. I grew up around black folk, okay? And I don't call them African American because I got friends that are black who are not African American. They might be Jamaican American or Cuban American, right? They're not African American. So my black friends, and Olin was my best battle buddy. He was black too. I felt comfortable. I never really saw color or anything like that. I grew up in high
Right.
school and it was half and half. So, you know what I mean? I grew up in Atlanta, okay? Um, so outside of that, gave my life to the Lord, get back to the barracks and find out that Olin rededicated his life. So now we're like, Bible studies and going to prayer groups, and I'm learning how to be discipled. I'm learning what is important about becoming a Christian because, outside of watching my mom, read her Bible. And then, of course, one time, as a teenager, I was tripping on acid one time, and I came home and I'm in my room wide awake, and my mom comes in the middle of the night thinking that I'm asleep and prayed over me for 2 hours while I'm tripping on acid. What I learned in that was it's probably not smart to be tripping on acid, number one. Number two was how many times had my mom come in and prayed for me like that and I didn't know, right?
Right.
I started to have a different understanding of some things. And that's when I got born again in on the other side of the world. And, that really grew over about a 9-month period. We went to court for this thing, and nothing looked good because it was super political. They had, a lot of testimony, even though it was false testimony, like the way that they were framing it, saying we were instigators and we were the ones when we were really truly defending ourselves. Um, it, it almost got to a point where I had said to God one time, God, if I go to prison for the rest of my life, I'm going to serve you the best I can from that prison. I mean, I had just got so settled in the peace of my relationship with God back then that I learned very early about presence over performance. I didn't grow up with a lot of religious entanglements and traditions within me. You know what I mean? I go into services today, and if they have traditional hymnals, I still don't know half the songs. Okay. So I don't have a lot of religion in me and let me specifically say something. When I say religion, I mean that place where men and women try to decide how relationship should be with God. in a not so much biblical sense. That's what I mean by religion. It's here. Let me show you what you need or how to do. I didn't grow up
Yeah,
with
it's
that
the
type of
structure
stuff, you
and the
know?
rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I really learned was God's presence is not earned, it's encountered. And now here's the
Mm.
cool thing. So Kojic, remember I said Kojic. Well, fast forward, I am a clinical chaplain and I am ordained in the Church of God. And Kojic is a slant of the Church of God, which is a Pentecostal denomination. You have Church of God of Prophecy, Church of God, and Church of God in Christ. And Church of God in Christ is the black slant of the Church of God. And so crazy that here, so many years later, that even back then, it was like God was positioning me for things that I had no foresight of in the future, right? And I'll tell you that it really turned into what I call my Daniel in the lion's den situation, because when the verdict came down, and you know this already, but when the verdict came down, the jury found us guilty on 3 counts. And I remember immediately just kind of settling in and being like, okay, well, I already said this. I mean, I already told God what I was going to do. So, and then the judge starts talking in Korean, and the people who were super excited that the guilty verdict had come down now are not so excited. So it was like, you'd just gone ahead, but now the team you're against just kicked a field goal, go ahead type situation, or a flag was thrown and everything's, changed. And he started talking to us in English, and he thanked us for serving our country. He thanked us for protecting his family and serving there. He did get on to us a little bit for like some conduct unbecoming, which I think, hey, any judge is going to do, right? Even though we were defending ourselves, there's probably definitely some ways we could have de-escalated without, putting a couple of them in the hospital. Um, Having said that, he reversed the verdict. He reversed the verdict and said that we would not spend our lives in prison in Korea, but he did tell us that we would never be able to come back. And so I do have an active JAG order on me that I cannot travel to South Korea, and I'm okay with that.
I'm about to say,
Um,
I was like, I think you'd be
yeah,
okay with that. I think you'll
and
manage.
and then when I came back stateside, I found a church that was local to the base, and I started into the struggle of what does it mean to form into a believer and a Christian man, and what does that mean without a whole lot of really good mentorship. I was kind of just stumbling along on my own because there wasn't a lot of really good examples around me. A lot of people who are in military service or first responder type service, their God is usually some type of addiction, to try and numb the and process their real life experiences. And hey, man, I would fall into that boat sometimes too. And we didn't even get into like adverse childhood experiences from like growing up and things like that. But I think I learned along the way that as long as you're still here, you have an opportunity to write your story. Nobody else can write it for you as long as you hold the pen and you stay in the game. When I think about Peter and Judas, right? They both failed God in the same moments, in a very critical moment, in the moment of Christ's death and crucifixion. Um, but Peter held on to presence. There was something about that situation that he stayed connected to community where Judas didn't. Judas must have thought I have no community left. And now I just went back to the temple and tried to make things right. And they shamed me when I returned to silver. And he went and killed himself. And I just always kind of thought that healing requires some type of intentional pursuit. You got to pursue after something, which I think is connected to purpose. Um, and I also learned we don't heal alone. We heal in community, right? And that God will meet you wherever you are. God meets you in the now, not in the past, not in the future. He meets you in the now. And that's what I learned about the secret place, about Peter's restoration, about how the father runs after the prodigal. As I started to, read, I started to develop these anchors in my life that continued to bring me back to God's presence over performance, and that's kind of where I tend to lean.
Dude, I think it's great. Like, so, like, you call it presence over performance. I was literally just talking about this with my last guest that I had on here as we were kind of hitting on a similar vein. How a lot of times, man, we go through life, and this is where you see it a lot more on, like you said, the religious side with the rules and the
Hmm.
structure. Is it's all based on works, is how we originally perceive things, like very transactional. Like, hey, if I do this, then I should receive this in exchange, right? And whenever we
Yeah,
run into something of adversity, or maybe something quite the opposite happens, maybe the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, this is where a lot of people struggle, is because they think that they should be getting the blessing or not going through this pain because they've been doing X, Y, and Z. And now that they're going through that, so many people end up leaving the faith because of that, right?
yeah,
And as you said earlier, like, it's already something that's difficult and most likely not something that you actually want to do. So we just find the easiest excuse to go, oh, that's why I leaned out, right?
yeah.
Where the truth is what you said, its presence is, from my own experience, as well as, I see this with a theme of everyone I talk to about this too, is God doesn't want our works. He wants our heart, right? He
Come
wants
on.
the faith. He wants our relationship with them first. And obviously he wants to use us to do great and wonderful works. And that's why it's important. We need to give him the most amount to work with, right? And how we're
Yes,
developing
yes.
ourselves and showing up and being consistent and all these things. But that's not the first thing he looks at. He goes, I want your heart. So I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into that, like, that presence aspect. And, what are some things that you've learned through your journey that allow you to focus on being present outside of, like, the big emotional highs? So obviously, you get through this court case, and the judge out of nowhere goes, I'm going to let you go. That's a great, I'm sure that carried some momentum with you. I'm like, God's real, and oh my God, and thank you. But
Yeah,
eventually those feelings go away. And then you hit the valley, right? And now you start questioning, like, was that God, or was that just a
yeah,
coincidence? And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. So that's where, like you're saying, being present is really important. So I just love for you to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that side of, like, how do you stay present during the valleys?
yeah. I think for me, when I look at the story of the prodigal, everybody always focuses on the prodigal, right? The one who takes what is theirs and goes and squanders it and then comes back to the father's house. And look, honestly, that's all of us. Like, we're all prodigals until we find God, right? I think the real focus of that story, Jonathan, is the eldest brother. Because what it shows me is that you can be super close to the father's heart and be very far. I mean, you can be super close to the father's house, but very far from the father's heart.
Mm.
And that is the importance of presence, right? Living in obedience, yet missing intimacy. The eldest brother was obedient, but he lacked the intimacy. And so here's the thing. Couldn't that story have been so much different if when the eldest brother sat down with the father, he ended up like hearing the father's heart and then being like, you know what, Dad, I'm going to go find him for you. The eldest brother lived in the father's house and didn't know what was his, didn't even recognize the community of his own brother, right? There was no compassion or anything or empathy there. It was kind of like, and so the danger is you can be morally upright, but emotionally distant. And you can resent grace and not have any joy in your life, right? I mean, kind of like this, like, look at these, Dad, these years I slaved for you, but you never even gave me a young goat. What? Right? And that pride, that type of pride blocks restoration. So, unlike the prodigal, the eldest brother, he never saw his own need. He was focused on his brother.
Mm,
His pride masked his own broken heart because there was a lack of presence and intimacy. I mean, what would it have looked like if he had just sat down and had a cup of coffee every morning with his dad? Dad, how are you doing? "Oh, I'm really concerned about your brother." See, he was obedient on the outside, but he was judgmental on the inside. So here's the thing. You can be in church, you can be on the mission field, you can be doing right, but you can be lost in self-righteousness.
mm.
And pride blinds you of your own need for the same mercy you deny others. And I think not growing up in church, I kind of had a master class on some of those little intricacies. When I say performance over presence, the elder brother, he actually valued effort more than relationship. He didn't understand that everything the father had was already his. Not
Mm.
something he had to earn. It was already his, right?
Right.
Because he said, what did he say? He said, "My son, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours." Well, that wasn't a revelation to him. So you can confuse your worth with your work and living for the Father, but not with the Father. I
Mm.
think we live in a generation right now where everybody's in love with information about God, but not intimacy with God. You know? Like what do they say? You can stand in the garage and call yourself a car all day long, right?
Right, right.
But
Well, it's
and so yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, it's the 1% difference, man. At the end of the day, and I was joking with my last guest, Sean, who's one of our other authors, and we were talking about how we both had to get basically beat up by God to fully submit, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm not talking about like, and there's times where I've submitted 99%. But it took that one moment for me to fully submit and make it 100%. And then that's when all of the transformations, the blessings, the revelation, all the things came. And it was in that 1% difference. And it was like you said, like you had to drop the ego, right? I know that's something
hmm
like I come like my background's in sales. You kind of have to have a little bit of an ego if you're
yeah,
gonna do well in sales, right? So like as I've gone through this season and coming out the other side, I've had to learn how to tap into like a totally different fuel source, right? Because
yeah.
pride's a powerful fuel source, right? Like
Come
it can
on,
definitely do a
yeah,
lot of great things on the outside for you. But the problem with doing it that way, at least in my experience, was it felt like no matter what I built, it was all built on a Jenga set with a lot of pieces missing out. And all it took was one blow from the left and it would always topple over. Sometimes it would take
yeah.
longer than others, but I felt like I was constantly having to rebuild my Jenga set at the end
Yeah,
of the
yeah, I
day.
get that. There's something that I see, and hear my heart here. I really pride myself off of my work as a clinical chaplain, being someone that doesn't encounter people with some predetermined journey I think they need to go on. I really authentically meet people where they are and want to walk with them where they need to go, not where I believe they should go, right? And in doing that, I would hope that I come across very non-judgmental, like I companion people. So the tragedy in the story around the prodigal, Jonathan, is not that the prodigal left, it's that the eldest brother never truly entered
Hmm.
and he lived in the house.
Right.
That's that's the thing, right? And so we I really think one of the greatest deceptions that I've seen on the earth concerning God's people is that the enemy has this, we're going to call it a wile, right? Because the Bible says that, you see, roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, right? And if you know anything about lions, right, the male roars to move the crowd of whatever they're hunting, and the females are the hunters. So
Mm-hmm.
his roar is just to get people to move, to react, to distract, so that the weakest of
We'll get
them
separated.
get separated and then devourable, right? I think the enemy really does a really good job at getting believers to a place positionally where they're constantly trying to become something that they already are.
Hmm.
It's brilliant.
It is
Destroy
brilliant.
yourself,
Yeah.
right? Destroy yourself. Um, because the reality is the enemy can do nothing to us if we know who we are in Christ. We are our own worst enemy. I tell people, you want to see the devil, just go look in the mirror, right? Um,
Right.
and, so um, that's that's really the thing is you have to understand you have an enemy. There were years I had a great Bible teacher who's gone to be with the Lord. And I remember I would have amazing opportunities. And some people say, oh, this doesn't sound amazing, but amazing opportunities at like 3 and 4 in the morning. He loved to swim. Okay. He loved to swim. And us, we'll call us book boys, servants, armor bearers, whatever you want to call us. We would get an opportunity if he called us at 3, 4 in the morning. He's like, hey, I'm going to go swimming. Do you want to come? And he was a little bit overweight and he really technically needed help getting in and out of the pool because his wife was little, tiny woman. Um, and there would be days that, you ever know, like those days when you're like, man, I really don't feel like going to church today. And
Right.
then you go and it ends up being like the most amazing message for you, like directly for you. Like it was Rhema,
Yeah.
like if you had missed it, right? Well, a lot of those times, you get the call at 3 or 4 in the morning, you're thinking, oh, God, I gotta go, pull him out of the pool, pull him in the pool type thing. But I really think it's in those moments when we hear, and I think life teaches you this, but to discern when you hear that, oh, you don't want to go today, go. Like
Yeah.
you have to understand
Right.
it's the opposite, right? Anything that the enemy says to you, you have to know that the opposite is true. So if he
Right.
tells you you're never going to be successful, you will. If he tells you your children are going to die, they're going to live. Like he is the father of lies, right? That's his thing. So in those moments, I really learned I'm just going to muscle
Dude.
through this and I'm going to go to the pool.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and let me tell you what he taught me this one morning. So I'm in the pool and he goes, Brother Carter, he goes, do you know one of the most important things that I believe that believers miss? I was like, no, sir. And it was one of those moments where I knew he wasn't about to tell me something gossipy, right? He was about to tell me something that was going to be like an anchor or a pillar in my life. And I felt it. And I leaned in, Jonathan. I said, tell me. He goes, people spend more time talking about their mountains than they ever do speaking to their mountains. Oh. And I was like, yeah, because the Bible says, say to the mountain, be thou removed and be cast in the sea. Doesn't say talk about the mountain, right?
right.
And I'll tell you what, man, that specific truth right there has helped me conquer and fight against, but find victory in areas in my life that I know I never would have if I didn't know how to speak to the mountain.
Right. Well, I want to touch on something that you said, and it's that counterintuitive feeling, right? Of like, I don't feel like doing X, Y, or Z. And then when you actually do that thing, you actually get the very thing that like you may not even know that's what you needed or even that's what you wanted,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
I'm glad you brought that up because something I've learned, and this is like relatively within the last 6 months, right? I've just kind of discovered for me is anytime I feel anxious about something, I know that's exactly the very thing that I need to go do to get the blessing that I'm looking for on the other side. Right. And sometimes
Hmm.
that shows up into showing up for a podcast. Like maybe that day I'm feeling anxious. Maybe it's showing up to an event. Right. And I'm an introvert. So, like, dude, it takes a little bit to like get me like to put myself in that place. But I find that the more that I do these things for the conversations and opportunities that once again may create anxiety, the more anxiety I'm feeling about it, the bigger the thing that I'm going to get on the other side. And I kid you not, Carter, like every single time without fail, I've gotten that very thing. So now I use that as my compass to go, oh, well, yeah, I feel this way, but I already know what's going to happen on the other side. So I've used that to rewire my mindset on attacking the things that honestly create those feelings within myself. So I'm glad you brought that up. Like that's
Yeah.
been a really big lesson I've been leaning
Yeah.
into and learning this year for myself.
Yeah. I'm pretty convinced that we hear three voices during the day. We hear God's voice, we hear our voice, and we hear the enemy's voice. And learning how to decipher between those
Discern.
is critical. Yeah. And I'll tell you, you learn that in the secret place. The secret place isn't where we learn information. It's where we receive revelation, right? It's why, I mean, and Jesus modeled this so good. I mean, how many times did he separate himself from the others and go pray? I mean, I
Oh, all the
probably
time.
need to go through the Bible and like write down, but there's probably so many times that he did that that aren't even recorded, right?
Hmm.
And it's because that's where we learn identity. The secret place is where we learn who we are, not who we think we are, who we think we are, but what God says we are, right? It's where we learn what peace feels like because that's where God's presence is. Look, God's not, it's like we go, the secret place is God's hiding. No, God's already there. He's just showing up. It's where we don't just find presence, we find perspective,
Mm.
right? And it's God's perspective. It's it's the secret isn't that he's present. It's that it's what he reveals in that presence, right? We receive specific instructions too. Like, when I was on this last bear hunt, the one of my guide who it's pretty wild how the Lord uses your calling in every instance, not just where you specific like your profession. It's like you're always there. But while we were on that trip, my bear guide lost his best friend to suicide the second day we were there. And so here I am thinking I'm out healing in the wild, right? And no, you're doing that, but you're also going to help this young man understand or
Right.
find some understanding connected to his loss in this situation. And I remember being out there and this gentleman said to me, he goes, I'm just really trying to figure out what God's trying to do. And I said, have you ever asked him what he's trying to do? And he looked at me like, I said, let me tell you this. You've been out here with me and my son, all week. This was the last day of the hunt, right? I said, you've been out here with me and my son all week. He's 25. He's a sergeant in the Army. I'm his dad, but I don't parent him like I do my 2.5-year-old, right? I said, so, you know, I don't give prescriptive or unsolicited advice to my son who's 25. until he asked me.
Right.
And I said, that's how God is. He's waiting for you to ask.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a mature person. Now, there are instances. Look, if your life's in danger, it's a whole different story. I don't care how old my kid is. If they're out in the middle
Right.
of the interstate and I see a car coming, I'm going to be like, hey, there's a car coming, right? But in everyday life and trying to figure stuff out and just gain revelation, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but when people try to tell me what I need to do and you don't have a relationship with me,
Oh
I'm going to tell
yeah.
you, go hit the rocks,
Right.
bro.
I'm gonna
Like,
do the
you don't,
opposite most likely.
yeah, yeah, just out of spite sometimes, right?
Right.
But in that place, right, it says that what we do in secret, Jesus will reward us openly for what happens in the secret place. And the reward isn't always stuff, it's strategy. Joseph had dreams in the secret place. David learned worship and war in the field. Jesus received strength in Gethsemane when he was praying, right? You don't just get comfort, you get clarity.
Right.
You what to say, what to build, who to forgive, when to rest. Like these are all
And
assignment strategic things, right?
here's what's really cool about that, dude. I'm so glad you're touching on this because, like, I had my experience with it too. And as I've read the Bible, something that gave me a lot of peace, because, like, once again, you can get the marching orders, but once you start on your path, like, you're still going to run into seasons where you have doubt. You're going to
Hmm.
have seasons where, like, is that what he said? I'm not really sure anymore. Right.
Hmm.
But as I've read the Bible, there's not one time that God didn't finish what he started. Not once. Not one time did he go, I'm just going to do half of it. I'm just
Yeah.
going to do 2/3 of it, or I'm just not going
Mm-mm.
to do it at all. No, every time he said something that he was going to do, he did
Yeah.
it. And quite
Yeah.
oftentimes would do it in an abundant way on the back end, right? So for me, like, every time I've kind of hit like a valley on, what I've been called to do, I remind myself of that. And it gives me a lot of peace as I'm going through my daily struggles with things. So I just wanted to add that as like kind of a tail
Yeah.
end onto what you're talking about,
Yeah.
because it's so true what you're saying, man.
Yeah. Well, when the seven sons of Sceva, like they encounter the demon, right? And he says, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? They had not gained any spiritual credibility because they had never spent any time in the secret place.
Hmm.
See, the secret place isn't for titles. It's for time with God. That's it. Like, imagine what your life would be like if the only time you wanted to be intimate with Renee is when you wanted to get some or something like that, right? And
Right,
you're just like,
right.
that's the only time you paid her any attention, was like, hey, I need something from you. Well, that's no relationship,
Yeah, that's a
right?
transactional relationship.
That
Yeah.
there's nothing there. And so here's what I hope anybody who listens to this understands. You win wars in silence that others will never understand, because it's not the seen wounds that will destroy you. It's the unseen wounds. And you battle unseen things where you're unseen.
Mm,
That's in the secret place. That's in the place where you meet with God, because we don't learn to win battles by making noise. We learn to win battles by the authority that God gives us in our heart in the secret place. That's why, well, the Father sees in the secret, right? He's going to reward you openly. And so when we see God and ourselves in that space, that's where transformation happens. Moses' face, it shone after being in God's presence. That's why it was shining, right?
hmm.
Jesus, when he withdrew, he didn't withdraw from everybody to go escape. He went to go engage with purpose. So transformation happens in hidden places before it happens in public spaces. And that's the thing around success and all of that. We think that the sound of the applause is what gives us a platform. No, it's the presence in the secret place that gives us a platform. And that's the
Yeah.
only platform you need,
Well,
right?
no, dude, you're spot on, man. And once again, for me going through like my metamorphosis to say like there was like a 2 year period where like I felt very isolated and
Mm,
certain relationships were removed from my life. And at the time, it was challenging for me. But in hindsight, I look at it and go, that happened for me. Like that had to happen, right? And there
yeah,
was a period where I felt alone, but that's where I believe that I was pulled to be isolated during that time period so that I could go through and win these internal battles that I have been struggling with through submission, through building a relationship with God. And it's also very present throughout, tons of stories that you're way more well versed than I am, with being able to articulate a lot of these stories of how, like, a lot of the protagonists in these stories, like, were isolated first before they were then anointed to go, like you said, go out and do great,
yeah,
wonderful things and
yeah,
get the applause at the end of the day. But
yeah.
first came the isolation.
Come on. It's what David did in the wild, right? With the bear and and all of that, protecting the sheep. That, look, he just his dad told him to go take some grain and some food up to the thing, and the next thing you know, he's defeating a giant. That's kind of look, there's a trap that I think is so easy for people to fall into, and it's the trap of needing to understand.
Mm.
Okay. Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not into your own understanding. Now that is a scriptural truth. God is saying don't lean to your own understanding. I encounter veterans and people who have experienced trauma and griefs that you don't name, like disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss and things that are really hard to name. And even if you do name them, people are less likely to kind of lean in and identify those things with you. So they're kind of like, ish, right? The need to understand everything becomes a form of control, not faith. That's not faith. Because over in Philippians 7, what does it say? And the peace of God, which does what? Passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So here's the truth. You can't receive peace that passes all understanding if you're still demanding understanding. It can't come to you. And so when we have a complete focus on wanting to understand this and having to understand why that happened, we no longer can have the peace of God guard our hearts and the minds the way that God has designed it to do,
Mm.
because we've decided, you know what? I'm going to get up on the cross myself. And here's another one. In Galatians, it says, whoever hangs on a tree is cursed. Well, Jesus became the curse for us, so we wouldn't have to be. But when we decide to get up on the cross ourselves, now we've become a curse unto ourselves. Because what we're
Mm.
saying is, you know what, Lord, thank you for handling this and this and this, but I'm going to hold on to this and not
Right.
surrender this. And that usually becomes the thing that becomes a great downfall in our life.
Yeah.
We got
Dude,
to surrender stuff. You know what I mean?
that goes right back to my Jenga analogy. Like, I'm like, hey,
Come
I'll give
on.
you these things, but I'm
Yeah.
still gonna hold on to this because I'm Jonathan Loudermilk and I make it
Yeah.
happen. It wasn't until I gave him all of it, dude, that like I tapped into a whole different fuel source, and it took a
Come
little
on.
while to learn how to
Yeah.
operate with that fuel source, but man, is it way more sustainable and enjoyable, and just realizing that like I don't have to do it all on my own. I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to give him the most amount of work with.
That's it. God doesn't need more. He needs surrender, right? When I think about, so I was thinking earlier today about John 6, where um, Jesus prays for the fish and the loaves. And a lot of times, and listen, I'm a theologian. I mean, my dad always says I have more degrees than a thermometer. So I'm a word person. You know what I mean? I like words. And so when you place something natural in Jesus' hands, he blesses it and then breaks it and then multiplies it. It doesn't multiply in his hands though. it multiplies in yours. You have to
Mm.
give it to them to bless. It multiplied as the disciples broke it, right? It's not like Jesus prayed for it and all of a sudden there was baskets of stuff everywhere.
Wow, that's such a good insight. I didn't pick up on that before.
Well, and I'm going to tie this into the book project, right? So for me, finally writing the book was me taking something natural to put into God's hands so that he could bless it and make it supernatural. Now I have to distribute it, right? It's not his job to distribute it. It's my job. So Jesus, he's not the one that handed out the multiplied bread. The disciples did that. The miracle happened in motion,
Mm.
not sitting back. So many people sit back and they're just like, I'm just going to pray and I'm going to wait for God. I'm
Right.
going to wait for God to do this.
Ugh.
I'm going to just wait on God. How many times do we hear that?
Right. And waiting isn't sitting there, it's active.
Well, God waits for us to move, right? In
Right.
obedience before the provision is usually released. It's like, it was when the staff hit the water split. What if Moses had never dropped the staff into the water? God's power was still there, but Moses had to put the staff into the water and then the water split. So here's the thing. Why do you already have like the boys' lunch? And that seems small. What do you already have? Well, they had the boys' lunch, and that just seems small. Well, here's what we got. What do you got? Oh, I just got this little boy's lunch. But God can multiply anything through obedience. I was immediately when I think about that, I was thinking about when Jesus turns the water into wine, right? And a lot of people they love this story because whether it gives them, an okay to drink wine, is alcoholic, is it not? That's not the importance of the story. The importance of the story is instant vintage, like this.
Hmm.
God collapses natural time frames when his glory is revealed. Okay. What usually takes a process, like plant the seed for the grape, watch the vine grow, harvest the grape, smash the grape, ferment the grape, then bottle the grape, right? There's a process to making a vintage wine. And what God is showing them is not only am I the God of process, but I can accelerate what should have taken years in a single moment,
Right.
right? I can do, I can, he's not just restoring your story, he's rewriting it with his glory.
Right.
And so here's the story I wanted to tell you in the little time that we have left. Okay. So I write this book. And it's like, to me, it's like it's that process of the wine. We have we do the right, then we edit it, and then we get the cover, and then we do all this stuff, right? But then what do we have? We have a finished product. So here I am. I'm going on a trip to Washington. I have a couple of books with me, our author copies, before we ever, before that book was ever released on May 13th. And so I have this book, and my prayer is, God, send me to the person that needs this book. Okay. Put it in my backpack, go on my trip. Now I'm on my way back. I'm flying from Spokane, Washington to Denver. And as I'm getting onto the plane, I'm sitting in my seat. I usually jump on when they say, hey, military people or whatever, I'm on. And I hear a lady talking, but I'm not really paying attention to what she looks like or other people around. I'm digging stuff out of my backpack and I see my book. And I hear her talking about being at a conference all week and how they really need people in the space of moral injury and traumatic grief and people that have like practical things to bring to deal with these types sometimes of things. Well, this is what I write about. This is what I do on a daily basis in my job, right? Is moral injury and then which is simply violations of what's right to you that can fracture your identity and make you feel unworthy or bring shame or all those types of things, right? And so um I hear her talk long enough that I grab the book and I just pass it over the seat because she's sitting behind me and I say, hey, I'd like to recommend this person. And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "Is this you?" And I was like, "Yeah, the book's not released yet, but I've been listening to you, and a lot of the things you're talking about are things that I talk about in this book." She's, thank you so much. I'll take it. Didn't hear nothing from her. I start talking to the guy who's next to me, who, again, lost his brother to suicide when he was younger. And so we're talking about that. And I'm just kind of telling him like some practical things on how to do rituals of remembrance, or, allow his brother to continue to live through and not focus on the tragedy. You know what I mean? Just kind of what I do. And we get to that point where they're like, hey, turn your tray tables, we're getting ready to descend. I get a tap on my shoulder, Jonathan. And she goes, Dr. Chet. And I was like, yeah, it kind of startled me. She goes, I need to tell you something. I have read thousands of books, and this is one of the best books that I have ever read in my entire life. She goes, sir, this is a Picasso on how people can navigate traumatic grief and moral injury. And she's like, oh my God. She's like, this is amazing. And I turn around, she's a Muslim woman. She's got the burqa on, which, didn't really shock me or anything, because, when I write, I don't write to a specific religious genre or anything. I just
Right.
write to people, right? And she's like, I'm going to share this book and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think nothing of it. Okay. Well, months ago, Jonathan, I created a LinkedIn page just because I woke up one day and I felt the Lord said, hey, create a LinkedIn page. So I did. So 3 days after I get back, I get a notification on my LinkedIn page. Hey, my sister-in-law, Mimi, gave me your book. I want to join up and see how we might collaborate. Well, this is a Harvard psychiatrist who has 8 published books and works in the area of trauma recovery around like refugees from the Middle East. So that, like, the Palestinian and the Israel conflict, all the stuff that we're seeing on the news today, right? All of this displaced people. He says, look, I want to get your book mass produced in Arabic. So I would like to get it translated so we can send it to the Middle East, because I believe what you've written can really help those people regain purpose and find
Wow.
recovery from like this healing, right? Again, make something, put it in the Lord's hands, let Him distribute it, right? And that's a little bit of the story. And I'm mindful of the time too, but that's a little bit of the story of how you got to produce something,
Right.
to something to be supernatural. It has to be natural first. Then God adds his super and it becomes supernatural.
Dude, first of all, congratulations. Second of all, thanks for holding out on me, dude, and just now telling me this. I'm going to pay you back for that, by the way. We've been sitting on that story for a minute, but dude, I'm so happy
Yeah.
for you, man. And it's just a great example of the message you've come on to share today. So, dude, let's do this as we got to land the plane. What's the best way for people to connect with you, follow you, do all the things?
Yeah, best way to connect with me is go to drcartercheck.com. You can shoot me emails, connect with me anywhere there. You'll find out about, the book that we're talking about, Healing in the Wilds. You'll find out about my nonprofit work, Hunt Therapy, which is really just hunting after purpose in life, right? I work with vets and first responders through my nonprofit to really regain purpose through trauma recovery. And yeah, I mean, get the book Healing in the Wild. It's out, and it just released today on Spotify and Apple, and so your audiobook platforms, you can get it there if you're the person that likes to listen to it. And here's what I want you to hear: if you're still here, then you're operating at 100% success rate to the most tragic and crazy things you've been through in your life. Now, I don't know what else you operate at 100% in, but that's a pretty good thing to operate at 100% in. So for me, the most important thing is find out why. Find out the purpose connected to why you're still breathing air and jump into that. And I believe that what I wrote has the ability to meet you where you are and walk you through trying to either figure that purpose out, regain purpose that maybe you think you've lost, but notice that resiliency has been there along the way. And what would make it even more powerful is if you could connect to God in that too and find out what God calls you. Because remember earlier you said, hey, there's these stories in the Bible, and people are always going through these crazy things and have these amazing stories. The most crazy and amazing stories to me are the ones who receive a name change. See, there's a name that God calls you, right? And finding out what God calls you and what he's called you to do is probably the most important thing you'll ever experience in life.
Well, yes, and amen to that. Well, once again, Dr. Carter, thank you so much for coming on, man. Dude, this could have easily been a 2-hour podcast, man. We'll definitely have you on for another episode. And for those of y'all
Come on.
tuning in, once again, hope you got value out of the episode. If you did, make sure you share this with someone that needs to hear this message today. You never know with the power of the right message at the right time with the right person we can do for them. Outside of that, I'll see you in the next episode. Make sure to go all in. I'm putting God first in your life so you can start living your best life. God bless.
Thank you.